I spent years trying to forget what I saw in that room. Years pretending I was just another housekeeper working at the hotel where Whitney Houston spent her final hours. But the truth is, I was the last person to find something that no one, not the police, not the press, ever knew existed. Her Bible wasn't where it should have been. Nobody noticed. The investigation was rushed and small details were ignored. Only I bent down to pick up a fallen charger and by chance saw the back of the nightstand. And something stood out there. A folded piece of paper, hidden. When I opened that note, the air left my lungs. To this day, I wonder, if I hadn't seen it, would the world ever know? I had worked at that hotel for years, and I'd cleaned rooms for celebrities before. Actors, musicians, politicians, people whose faces you'd recognize from magazines or television. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I was about to experience in that room. The day after it happened, the entire floor felt different. The hallway was silent in a way that wasn't normal, even for a luxury hotel where discretion is everything. It was the kind of silence that presses against your chest, that makes you aware of your own breathing. The air itself felt heavy, almost sacred, like the walls were holding their breath and watching every step we took. My supervisor found me in the staff locker room that morning. I was tying my hair back, getting ready for my usual rounds, when she approached with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Her voice was flat, professional, but there was something underneath it, maybe fear, maybe just exhaustion. "Room 434, she said quietly. "You'll handle the protocol. Don't ask questions. Don't talk to anyone about it. Just do what needs to be done." I nodded, but my stomach dropped. Everyone knew what had happened. The entire hotel staff had been whispering about it since the emergency vehicles arrived. We all knew whose room it was. We all knew what the world had lost. The investigation team had already swept through the suite the night before. I'd seen them from the service elevator, men in suits, some in uniforms, moving quickly through the space with cameras and evidence bags. But from what I overheard later, they seemed to be in a hurry. Maybe there was pressure to clear the scene. Maybe they just didn't think there was much to find. They checked the obvious places, the bathroom, the vanity, the coffee table, the nightstands. But they didn't move furniture. They didn't look behind anything. They took what was visible and left. When I pushed my cleaning cart through the door, I had to pause for a moment. The room didn't look like a tragedy had just occurred there. It looked almost staged, like someone had tried to erase the previous night entirely. The bed was rumpled but not destroyed. Towels were folded on the rack. Personal items had been collected, but not everything. There were still traces, a perfume bottle on the dresser, a pair of shoes by the closet, small things that reminded you a real person had been living here just hours ago. I started with the basics, the way I always did. Strip the bed, collect the linens, check the bathroom, wipe down surfaces. I moved mechanically, trying not to think too much about whose hands had touched these same objects, trying not to imagine what her last hours had been like in this space. That's when I noticed something on the floor behind the nightstand. A small white rectangle, partially hidden. At first I thought it was just trash, maybe a receipt or a piece of paper someone had dropped and forgotten. I bent down to pick up what looked like a phone charger that had fallen, and that's when I saw it more clearly. A Bible. It was wedged in the narrow space between the nightstand and the wall, pressed against the baseboard at an angle, as if it had been knocked off the table and fallen in a way that made it almost invisible, unless you were looking from that exact position. My heart started beating faster. Why hadn't anyone seen this? Why hadn't the investigators pulled the furniture away from the wall? Had they been that rushed, that careless? I glanced toward the door, half expecting someone to walk in and tell me to stop touching things. But the hallway remained empty and quiet. I was completely alone with whatever I was about to discover. Something told me this wasn't just a forgotten book. Something told me that what I was about to find would change everything I thought I knew about that night. And I was right. I picked up the Bible carefully, almost reverently, thinking it was just a forgotten object that had somehow escaped everyone's attention. My hands were shaking slightly as I lifted it from behind the nightstand, and I remember feeling the weight of it. Not heavy, but significant somehow, like it carried more than just pages and ink. As I brought it up to eye level, I noticed something immediately. There was a slight bulge between the pages, a subtle irregularity in the way the book naturally fell open. Something was hidden there, pressed between the thin paper like a bookmark, but deliberate, intentional. My heart started racing in a way I couldn't control. I'd found forgotten items before, jewelry, phones, wallets, things that guests left behind in their rush to check out. But this felt different. This felt important in a way I couldn't explain, like I was holding something that wasn't meant for my eyes, but had found its way to me anyway. I thought about calling my supervisor right then. That would have been the protocol. Find something unusual, report it immediately, let someone else handle it. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the investigation had been conducted, so quickly, so superficially. Maybe it was the feeling that anything I reported would just be dismissed as irrelevant, filed away, forgotten like everything else that didn't fit the neat narrative they'd already constructed. Or maybe, deep down, some part of me already knew that what I was about to find would be too dangerous to share with anyone. I pulled the note out slowly, terrified of tearing the paper. It looked old, not just from a few days ago, but like it had been there for a while. The texture was strange under my fingertips, dry, almost brittle, like it had absorbed years of prayers and tears from being pressed against those sacred pages. The paper was folded 3 times, compressed into something small enough to hide completely, no bigger than my thumbnail when closed. Someone had wanted this hidden. Someone had taken great care to make sure it wouldn't be easily found. The room was completely silent as I began to unfold it. No sounds from the hallway, no voices from neighboring rooms, nothing. Just my own breathing, which seemed too loud in that moment, and the faint rustle of paper as I carefully opened each fold. I kept thinking about what the investigators had said in their reports, what I'd heard whispered among the staff. Nothing relevant found beyond the obvious. That phrase kept echoing in my head as I looked at what I was holding. But this changed everything. The handwriting was immediately striking, shaky, uneven, like it had been written by someone whose hands were trembling, someone who was at their absolute emotional limit when they put pen to paper. Some letters were pressed hard into the page, while others were barely visible, as if the writer's energy had been fading with each word. I couldn't read it all at once. My eyes kept jumping from line to line, trying to process what I was seeing, trying to understand the magnitude of what had just fallen into my hands. This wasn't just a note. This wasn't a random scribble or a prayer or a Bible verse someone had copied down. This was a warning, a confession of exhaustion, a testimony from someone who could feel their body giving out but didn't know how to make anyone understand. My legs felt weak, and I had to sit down on the edge of the bed, still holding the note with both hands, like it might disintegrate if I wasn't careful. The cleaning cart sat abandoned in the doorway. My shift, my duties, the rules about not sitting on guest beds, none of it mattered anymore. I looked toward the door again, paranoid that someone might walk in and catch me. What would I say? How would I explain what I was doing, sitting on the bed with this paper in my hands, tears already forming in my eyes from words I'd barely begun to read? But the hallway remained empty. The universe, it seemed, had given me this moment of privacy. This terrible, beautiful, devastating moment where I was the only person in the world who knew this existed. I took a deep breath and forced myself to read it properly, from beginning to end. And with each word, I felt my entire understanding of that night crumble and reform into something much darker, much more painful, and infinitely more human than any news report had ever suggested. The handwriting was trembling, like it had been written by someone on the absolute edge of their emotional capacity. Every letter seemed to carry the weight of someone fighting to keep their hands steady, fighting to get the words out before courage or time ran out. The first sentence made my entire body freeze. I can feel the shadows getting longer, and I'm too tired to outrun them. I had to read it twice to make sure I'd understood correctly. My hands were shaking so badly now that the paper rustled audibly in the silence. This wasn't a prayer. This wasn't a journal entry. This was someone admitting they were physically and spiritually broken, someone who could feel their body failing but didn't know how to stop it. I continued reading with the overwhelming sensation that I shouldn't be seeing this, that these words were too private, too raw, too sacred for someone like me, a stranger, a hotel employee who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place. I didn't know anymore. There was a phrase that hit me like a punch to the chest. My voice is still here, but my strength is gone. I stopped breathing for a moment. She wasn't talking about giving up. She was talking about running out of fuel. The words felt like a confession of pure exhaustion, the kind where your soul is heavy, your body is screaming for rest, but you still have to smile for the cameras, still have to be what everyone expects you to be. Another line made me swallow hard, made my throat tighten with emotion I wasn't prepared to feel. The lights are too bright. I can't hide how much I'm hurting anymore. It was a plea for rest, a wish for peace that the world wouldn't give her. I could feel the crushing weight in those words, years of performing, of pushing through pain, of pretending everything was fine when she was barely holding on. She'd been screaming for help in the only way she knew how, and no one had been listening. There was a section that had been crossed out, scribbled over with heavy pen strokes, but the words were still legible beneath the ink. I told them I needed to rest, but they said the show must go on. My heart broke reading that. How many times had she asked for a break? How many times had she been told to push through, to be professional, to remember that millions of people were counting on her? The entertainment industry doesn't stop for exhaustion. It doesn't slow down for human fragility. Each word seemed to carry decades of pressure, of being told who she should be, instead of being allowed to simply be human. The loneliness in these sentences was suffocating. She'd been surrounded by people but completely alone in her struggle. The sensation of reading these words was almost unbearable. It felt like intimacy of the most profound kind, like I was witnessing someone's private pain in their most vulnerable moment. It was almost sacred, this glimpse into someone's breaking point. Someone who had fought to stay strong while her body slowly gave out. Then I reached the last sentence, and it completely destroyed me. I wanted to stay. God knows I tried. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They fell onto the paper, and I panicked for a moment, worried I'd damage it, worried I'd erase her words with my grief. I wiped my eyes quickly and held the note away from my face, trying to compose myself, trying to breathe through the weight crushing my chest. This wasn't a goodbye letter. This wasn't someone who had given up. This was evidence of a human being who had been fighting to stay afloat, fighting to keep going, until her body simply couldn't take it anymore. She hadn't chosen to leave. She had just run out of time. I sat there on that bed, holding that fragile piece of paper, and I understood something that would haunt me forever. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known her body was giving out, that the years of stress and pressure and performance had taken a toll she couldn't recover from. And she'd written this note as a warning, as a testimony, as proof that she'd tried to hold on. This could never be treated as trash. This could never be dismissed or filed away or forgotten. This was the voice of someone who'd been drowning, while everyone assumed she was just waving, and now I was the only person who knew it existed. My first reaction was fear. Pure, paralyzing fear. Not fear of what was written on that note, but fear of what would happen if I came forward with it, fear of being accused of planting it there, fear of being dismissed as an opportunist trying to get attention, fear of staying silent and carrying this burden alone for the rest of my life. I carefully folded the note back to its original size and slipped it into the pocket of my uniform, feeling my heart pound so violently I was sure someone walking by in the hallway could hear it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had to grip the cleaning cart just to steady myself. The investigation was already being treated as a closed case. I'd heard it from the managers, from the police officers who'd briefly questioned staff members. They had their narrative, their official version of events, and it was neat, simple, easy to file away. Accidental drowning, tragic end to a troubled life. That was the story they were telling, and nothing I said was going to change it. If I brought them this note now, days after they'd already processed the scene, what would they say? Would they even believe it was real? Or would they accuse me of fabricating evidence, of trying to insert myself into a tragedy for personal gain? I thought about the media circus outside. Dozens of cameras, reporters shouting questions at anyone who walked out the hotel doors, helicopters circling overhead. Every employee was being treated like a potential leak, a potential tabloid source. We'd all been warned repeatedly, don't talk to anyone, don't answer questions, don't even acknowledge what happened. If I came forward with this note, I wouldn't be seen as someone trying to honor her truth. I'd be seen as just another hotel worker trying to make money off a celebrity's death. They'd destroy me. I finished cleaning the room in a daze, barely aware of what I was doing, wiping surfaces I'd already wiped, straightening things that were already straight. My mind was miles away, trapped in a loop of questions with no good answers. When my shift finally ended, I practically ran to my car. I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel, feeling the note burning a hole in my pocket. It felt heavier than paper should feel. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. When I got home, I locked the door behind me, drew all the curtains, and sat on my couch with the note in my trembling hands. I read it again and again, and each time the words hit harder, hurt deeper. I cried for the exhaustion those words carried. I cried for a woman I'd never met, but whose suffering I could now feel as if it were my own. I cried because I knew she'd written these words, hoping someone would understand that she wasn't weak, wasn't giving up. She was just human, and her body had limits that the world refused to respect. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my mind. Tell someone, don't tell anyone, give it to the police, give it to her family. Destroy it so no one can use it for profit. Keep it safe so the truth isn't completely lost. None of the options felt right. Every path led to something terrible. I watched the news coverage over the next few days, and every time they mentioned her name, every time they reduced her life to headlines and speculation, I felt those words echo in my mind. I wanted to stay. God knows I tried. But that's not what they were saying. They were talking about her struggles, her mistakes, her demons, as if her death had been inevitable, as if she'd somehow brought it on herself. I wanted to scream at the television. I wanted to tell them they had no idea what she'd actually been going through, that she'd been fighting until the very end to hold on, that her body had simply given out under years of impossible pressure. But I couldn't. Because if I did, they'd never believe me. They'd call me a liar, an opportunist, someone trying to profit from tragedy. So I kept the note hidden. I put it in a small box in the back of my closet, wrapped in tissue paper like something precious and fragile, which it was. And with it, I locked away a piece of truth that the world would never know. But keeping silent didn't bring me peace. It brought me something much heavier. It brought me guilt that eats at me every single day. Time passed, but the note never left my mind. Not for a single day, not for a single hour, really. I always felt that keeping silent was almost a betrayal of the truth she'd tried to leave behind. A truth that said she'd been fighting, that she'd wanted to stay, that her body had simply run out of strength under the weight of a world that demanded more than any human could give. I never wanted fame. I never wanted money. I just wanted peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you did the right thing, but peace never came. The pain I read in those words, I'd never seen anything like it. It was human, intimate, fragile. It was the voice of someone who'd been screaming for help in whispers, hoping someone would hear before it was too late. And I realized that if I didn't tell this story, no one would ever know that she'd been asking for rest, for understanding, for permission to be human instead of superhuman. No one would know that she'd tried to hold on until the very end. I know many people won't believe me, and that's okay. I'm not telling this story for them. I'm telling it because I don't want to carry this weight for the rest of my life. Because every time I see her face on a magazine cover or hear her voice on the radio, I feel that note burning in my memory, reminding me that I know something the world doesn't. I'm telling it because that woman deserved to have been heard. She deserved to have people understand that she wasn't weak, wasn't careless, wasn't just another tragic celebrity story. She was exhausted, she was human, and she ran out of time. I'm telling it because maybe someone, somewhere, will read this and understand that there was more truth in that hotel room than any newspaper ever published. Maybe someone will realize that we need to listen when people say they're tired, when they say they need help, when they say they can't keep going at this pace. Maybe someone will learn that the show must go on shouldn't mean sacrificing human lives for entertainment. For years, I convinced myself that staying silent was protecting her privacy, protecting her memory. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was scared of being judged, scared of being called a liar, scared of disrupting the neat narrative everyone had already accepted. But silence has its own cost. And I've paid it every single day since I found that note. So I'm breaking my silence now, not for attention, not for profit, but because I believe she would have wanted someone to know. She hid that note in a Bible. Maybe hoping God would see it, maybe hoping that someday, somehow, the truth would find its way out. And maybe I was meant to find it. Maybe that's why I bent down at that exact moment, why I saw what everyone else had missed. I don't know if sharing this will change anything. I don't know if it will make people think differently about what happened that day. But I know this. Sometimes silence is more cruel than the pain itself, and I'm done being silent.